Please continue to enjoy your meal, but I would now like to introduce our keynote luncheon speaker, Ms. Nicole Barrett, who is the Training and Licensing Specialist for the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, in Montreal. Nicole is going to speak to us about the efforts going on around the world to recruit and train the next generation of airline pilots. Thanks for being here today, Nicole, and we look forward to hearing from you. Ms. Barrett.
Good afternoon. Relax. You know, you're going to have a very zen lunch. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I want to thank the ALPA team for inviting me. Thanks, Captain Keynote. I probably pronounced that very badly. My thanks also to UAA, Cassandra. I know where to find you. There she is. Thank you. And by the way, I think this association of a pilot association with universities, I think this is a very interesting move. I think it's a very good strategic move. Before I get started, how many of you know ICAO and what it stands for? Okay, we're good. I've been working with pilots. I'm not a pilot, but I've been working with pilots for several years now, and I've been listening to a lot of stories. You guys are into stories in a big way. And I've been doing a lot of work with pilots, especially when we talk about the competencies of pilots. That's most of my work. The reason I'm pleased to speak with you today is not just because of that, though. It's because I'm a mom. I have 2 sons. And I have a vested interest in making sure that they have all the tools they need to carve out their way into this new world. And the other reason why I'm happy to speak with you today is because this is too good an opportunity to miss, to share with you some thoughts and some ideas and mostly some questions about the next generation of aviation pilots. I'm going to suggest to you that to figure out solutions to the shortage of pilots, we need to do 3 things. The first one is we need to figure out how big or how small the shortage of pilots really is at a national or sub-regional level. Now, when I speak national, I mean contracting state of ICAO, national. I mean 191 contracting states that belong to ICAO. So we need to quantify and we need to qualify what that shortage is. What are the causes of shortages of pilots across the world? Because they're not the same depending on where you are in the world. The second thing we need to do, I think, is we need to describe how we expect pilots to perform on the job based on the performance of what the very best pilots do out there. And we need to describe this in a way that is adaptable in a variety of contexts, variety of operational, technical, regulatory, and cultural contexts. It may be that the job of piloting is changing, and we need to recognize this, and we need to adapt to it. The third thing we need to do, I think that's critical to me, is we need to understand how the next generation of pilots is wired. What do they want out of a career? What do they value? What motivates them? So that we can figure out how that fits with the pilot performance that we see, that we want to see, and how it probably needs to become. And then how that's going to play out in the job. So how did I get involved into NCAP? Well, let me tell you this story. In early 2009, my boss was Nancy Graham. How many of you know Nancy Graham? Yes, so you know how she is. So she called me up one day to her office, and the thing when Nancy calls you up to her office is you have to expect work. You may come in there asking for a decision, you're going to walk out with 2 other jobs. That's just the way it was. So she called me up to her office and she said, Nick, we're going to have a shortage of pilots, of aviation professionals, not just pilots. Get experts around a table and figure out what we're going to do about it. So in May 2009, we brought together about 40 experts and we brainstormed. These experts, by the way, came from industry, education, regulatory bodies. They represented the worlds of pilots, controllers, maintenance personnel, so very broad. And some of the questions that we put forward to them were, is there really a problem? How big is it? Is it an equal problem in every region and for every aviation discipline? Is it true to say that all aviation professions are not as attractive as they were? Is there a similar problem recruiting pilots and recruiting controllers? What are our expectations in terms of performance for different aviation jobs, including those of pilots? If we have good descriptions of these expectations, these competencies, then we'll have a better tool to select, to recruit, to train, to educate, and to retain that next generation. So the NGAP task force, NGAP stands for the next generation of aviation professional. It's now a commonly used word in ICAO. Everybody knows in the Secretariat in Montreal what NGAP means. Are you okay with me using NGAP? Okay. So the NGAP task force was created to develop these strategies and these best practices and these tools and standards and guidelines to help the aviation community to do all of those things. I want to mention 2 other initiatives that were critical for pilots specifically. Those are the IATA Training and Qualification Initiative, and the other one is the International Pilot Training Consortium, which brings together ALPA, the Royal Aeronautical Society, IATA, ICAO, and ICCAIA. So this task force has been doing a lot, and in 2011, ICAO published a forecast for licensed personnel for 2010 to 2030. How many of you have seen that forecast? Not a lot. It focused on pilots, maintenance personnel, and air traffic controllers. The forecast was produced as an attempt to quantify and to verify that there was an actual shortage of licensed personnel. So if you want more detail about the methodology that we used and all of that stuff, I'll be happy to provide it to you to the extent that I can. I personally think that a discussion about statistics does not mix well with dessert and coffee, but it may just be me. Let me see. There you go. So this is what we published in 2011. I apologize for the size of the slide. I want to preamble this with the following caveats. We used the data that we had and that we could access and that we could reasonably rely on. The other caveat is that we probably compared apples and oranges, thinking they were all apples and all oranges. What I mean by that is that, for example, the way you get an ATPL varies in different parts of the world. And it's not because you have an ATPL that you're employed as a commercial pilot. So what you'll probably notice is that for North America, we show a surplus of pilots. And we've had conversations about that already in this room. But bear in mind the caveats that I just gave you. This forecast was a good first attempt, but we need to do better, a lot better than that. Because this doesn't give us enough granularity to help drive human resource planning strategies, and that's what we need. We need a more detailed picture at a national and sub-regional level. National meaning for each ICAO contracting states. We need a clearer picture of the number of people we'll need for different aviation professions, including pilots, but also the demographic pool where we'll draw them from. I'll give you an example. To me, I keep giving this example, it's a powerful one. The median age in Canada is, what would you guess it is? 38. The median age in Yemen is 18. Clearly, you cannot use the same strategies, however different the countries are, you cannot use the same strategies, human resource strategies, to bring the next aviation professionals into the industry in those two different countries. Students at Zurich University of Applied Sciences have started to develop a prototype for an NGAP index that would use a whole bunch of indicators to start drawing a picture of what the aviation human resources are for a given state. So with this data, a state or stakeholders within a state can come together, airlines, training, education, regulator, and based on that information, start to formulate and implement strategies to make sure that there are enough pilots or controllers or maintenance personnel for a given state. I can tell you that Singapore, for example, is doing that. I'm sure that in the US there are several initiatives like that that are underway, in Canada as well. But we need to expand this model across the globe. So this is particularly important if you consider air traffic growth. So this is air traffic flow in 2010. This is my colleague Gilbert who develops these maps. This is 2020. Notice the red. 2030, 2040. Our job in ICAO is to standardize and harmonize practices to serve safety. Do all ICAO contracting states comply in the same way with the prescriptive requirements of Annex 1? Probably not. And this is why using licensing data for the forecast may slant results in a particular way. Should all airline pilots demonstrate the same competencies on the job? Probably yes. What are those competencies? Well, there's a $799 question and there's a $10 million question. You probably, if you're an airline, how many airline pilots? All of you are airline pilots, right? Okay, who is not an airline pilot? Oh, I'm good company, good. If you're an airline pilot, you probably can tell in the first 5 minutes, this pilot has it, this pilot hasn't, right? Yeah, I see some nods. Now, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I'm going to share a story from an air traffic controller. Don't take it personally, the pilots. Air traffic controller colleague once told me that if he goes to McDonald's and he can pretty well tell if the kid at the cash has what it takes to be an air traffic controller just by the way they multitask or manage money or deal with people or just the way they manage that particular task. So that's a selection process that's going to cost you $799, right? It's a little bit sketchy for pilot selection, I admit. So what makes a good pilot? How do you describe it? And how do you describe it in a way that is useful and practical for selection, for recruitment, for training, for assessment, and retention? That's the $10 million question. And especially these days, when it's wrapped up in the context of human automation interface, in upset prevention and recovery, in fatigue risk management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In ICAO, we think the concept of competencies can be really helpful in describing how we expect pilots to perform. And this concept of competencies builds on what we've learned so far about human performance. However, there's still a lot more we need to learn about human performance. I personally think that to boldly go where no man or woman has gone before is here. This is where we need to figure out things. And we need to do that a lot more, especially in complex socio-technical systems like aviation. We need to keep pursuing that line of inquiry. And however annoying, and I've been accused of being too academic every once in a while, sometimes we just have to ask the hard questions because some questions are just hard. We just need to keep at it. And by the way, with this work on competencies, we're working very closely with ALPA. There's been many conferences that have discussed these aspects of it. There will continue to be many conferences about it. Let me switch gears now. Who in this room was born in 1995 or after? I saw that, Cassandra. Okay. Who is a parent of someone who was born in 1995 or after? Okay. This generation has been called Generation Z or Generation C, digital natives, the new conservatives, etc. They have a whole bunch of names. They're born between 1995 and 2010, roughly. They're 5 to 20-year-old. In 2013, it was estimated that there were 1.9 billion Generation Z, roughly 27% of the global population. Most of these young people live in developing states. For example, 43% of Nigeria's population are Gen Z. In Germany, Gen Z is 13.5% of the population. In the US, Gen Z accounts for about 20% of the population. So what's special about them? They were born just a little bit before or after 9/11. They were raised, they grew up during institutional and economic instability. They know everything about global warming. They are very acutely aware of environmental issues. They are globally connected via social media, and there's social media with new names that I don't even know existed, right? I still go with Facebook and Twitter. Apparently that's passé. They are truly global citizens. To give you an idea of how connected they are, mobile is becoming the exclusive way to connect to the internet in India. There are 10 million users who access the internet in India exclusively through their mobile. But here's the interesting piece. 77% of these 10 million live in rural areas. Think about it. This is a game changer. When given the opportunities, the Gen Zers are educated, industrious, very collaborative, and eager to build a better planet. They're entrepreneurs when they're given the opportunities. They also learn differently. Their brain is wired differently. And they view education and training very differently. For them, proof of education is more about the skills and the competencies that they've acquired than the diploma or the score on the test. Oops. Let's see. I wanted to put the photos of these kids up. I'm calling them the poster kids of Gen Z. On the top left corner, top left corner, is Valentin Reverdy. He started a blog when he was 11 or 12. He started his own paper. He's a journalist. He's 16. Malala Yousafzai, bottom right. She's the Peace Nobel Prize winner. She's 18. Tavi Gavinson, top right. She owns a company and employs 80 people. It's a fashion company, and she's 17. Adora Zvitak, the last one. I watched a TED Talk she gave when she was 10. She's a writer and she's an activist. So here's what I would like you to do now. Are you with me? Okay. I want you to imagine preparing yourself to deliver an elevator pitch to a Gen Zer, one of those kids, about why becoming a pilot, an airline pilot, is the best thing since sliced bread. I've been thinking about this particular piece of my talk and thinking that we should clone Barrington and just put a video in every elevator, but, you know, we're not there yet. So you know what an elevator pitch is? An elevator pitch is a very concise, very carefully crafted spiel where you describe a project. Your mother should understand this. So it has to be very straightforward, simple, you know. And you have to deliver it in the time that you ride an elevator up somewhere. You just hope that the building is very tall. And it's not about selling the product, it's about convincing someone to invest. So you need to convince a 15-year-old about investing in an airline pilot career. You have 2 minutes to answer some of the following questions. What essential service does an airline pilot deliver? Why is it better to work for an airline or in business aviation than in another industry sector, say banking? How does an airline take in environmental issues and caters to the need of its workforce? What are the advantages, the lifestyle, the work-life balance, the opportunities to grow and to learn? These are all points that were raised in the previous talks, and it was done much more eloquently than I'm doing now. But try and explain that in 2 minutes to a 15-year-old who has an iPhone, by the way. So we're going to need to practice. And that may be another conference. So, time to conclude. Let me offer you these thoughts about myths and facts and solution. Myth number 1. The next generation views the role of the airline pilot in the same way we baby boomers do as a profession. Myth number 2. The next generation learns and views training like we baby boomers do, and traditional conventional training approach will work effectively with them. Myth number 3. For the next generation, once an airline pilot, always an airline pilot. Facts. Fact number 1. The number of airline passengers will increase. We're predicting 5 billion passengers in 2040. Fact number 2. In 2040, the oldest of Generation Z will be 45 and in key management positions in the air transportation system. A large proportion of these managers will be working in emerging economies. Fact number 3. Safety of the air transportation system depends on competent pilots. So solutions. Solution number 1, and it's the beginning of a solution. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Solution number 1 is collect and analyze data that is meaningful at a national and regional level about the next generation of pilots, and then strategize involving all stakeholders. I think this conference is a very good illustration of this. Solution number 2, pursue relentlessly the description of what a competent airline pilot performance looks like. This is a moving target, especially as new technologies emerge. Consider drones, changing regulatory frameworks that move to performance-based approaches, and changing airline business models. In December last year, we had the second NGAP symposium. And one of the side activities that we had was a speed networking activities. You know speed dating? Speed networking. And the idea was to have 8 or 9 mentors spread around a room and have groups of 4 or 5 NGAPs talk to each of these mentors for 5 minutes, very intense. And then we'd ring a bell, and then they switch tables, right? And the NGAPs would ask questions of the mentors, but the mentors would also ask questions of the NGAPs. That activity was an absolute hit. We put a list out, and we asked, okay, put your name down. We expected to have maybe 30 names. We ended up with 80 names of NGAPs that wanted to participate. And so we had to scramble and do it twice rather than just one time. When I spoke to the kids that set it up, and it's the NGAPs themselves that set it up, they said it was really, really good, and the thing they really liked is they spoke to a real person, to someone with experience, to a real person, someone with experience. They're not just about the social media. But the most important thing that they liked, the most important thing that they've appreciated is that they were listened to. So solution number 3, engage and continue to dialogue with the next generation of pilots. Thank you.